In a world where every voice desperately seeks to be heard, there exists another power, one that doesn't require words. It's the power of silence, not empty and meaningless, but filled with observation and insight. It's as if it scans the surrounding reality, penetrating masks and exposing true intentions. In an era when noise and verbosity have become an integral part of our lives, silence becomes a rare and valuable resource. Voices compete for attention, power, and recognition. But there are people who don't need words to assert themselves. They prefer to listen, observe, and wait, like chess players calculating every move. Friedrich Nietzsche once remarked, "The higher we soar, the smaller we appear to those who cannot fly." These words perfectly characterize the power of silence. It's like a flight that elevates a person above the hustle and bustle, allowing them to see the world from a different perspective. Such silence is frightening because it cannot be controlled or subdued. It exists outside the framework of accepted norms and expectations. This is the philosophy of dangerous silence, the realization of which forever changes the perception of the world. One who has grasped this wisdom will no longer be underestimated. In modern society, where loudness is often mistaken for a sign of strength, true power lies in the ability to listen and observe. A person who dominates conversations, floods the internet with their opinions, or demonstrates confidence in any situation may seem strong and influential. However, Nietzsche urged us to look deeper. True strength, in his opinion, doesn't need shouting or applause. It quietly resides in the shadows, watching, analyzing, and waiting for the right moment. In an age when extroversion and open self-expression are elevated to a cult, the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche, on the contrary, revered those who choose the path of restrained silence. He admired people who could maintain composure, avoid unnecessary explanations, and remain a mystery to others. But why did Nietzsche see a special power in silence? The fact is that such silence is not just the absence of words. It's a manifestation of control and self-possession, presence, without the need for presentation. It is this composure, according to the philosopher, that causes the greatest anxiety in society, far more than any outbursts of anger or aggression. Modern society lives by a certain formula. A person's existence is confirmed by their speech, and value is determined by how noticeable they are. But what happens when an individual refuses to follow these rules? When they don't seek approval, don't rush to justify themselves, and don't crave attention? Such a person, according to Nietzsche, frightens the crowd because they cannot be manipulated. You cannot prevail over someone who has already achieved self-control and doesn't need external recognition. Nietzsche called for the emergence of a new type of personality, not one who seeks to fit into accepted norms, but one who goes beyond them. The Übermensch, in his view, is a being that combines silence and steely will, unwavering and not needing excuses. Their strength lies not in loud statements, but in the absence of the need to make them. The modern world, according to the philosopher, is mired in incessant noise. One only needs to look at social networks to see the universal desperate thirst to be noticed. People shout into the void, using selfies, opinions, outrage, and the demonstration of virtue. Everyone plays their role, trying to attract attention. However, Nietzsche would look at this modern circus with disgust, considering it not a manifestation of strength, but a symptom of spiritual decline. He foresaw a world in which people would exchange the meaning of life for comfort, truth for applause, and the pursuit of greatness for an obsession with pleasing others. The philosopher dubbed this anthropological type the last man. And this definition goes far beyond the usual categories of evil or monstrosity. Rather, it's about a creature whose main characteristic is security, the desire to avoid any risk, conflict, or in-depth analysis. Such a person prioritizes pleasure, the pursuit of popularity, and a comfortable existence. And in modern society, this type, unfortunately, is ubiquitous. They actively express their indignation on social networks, carefully construct their public image, tirelessly consume information and produce content, sincerely believing that they have freedom. However, in reality, they find themselves trapped in public opinion, dependent on constant information noise. Nietzsche deeply believed that most people fear silence because it forces them to confront themselves. And when a personality is built solely on the desire to be seen and recognized, loneliness with one's thoughts becomes an unbearable burden. This is why silence often causes a feeling of awkwardness. And unpredictability and restraint in public expression make people uncomfortable. Indeed, when a person doesn't react dramatically to events, doesn't publish countless posts, and doesn't share every detail of their life, they become a kind of mirror. And most people can't bear to look into that mirror, preferring to dissolve into the crowd rather than face the uncomfortable truth about their true nature. In today's world, where the flow of information never ceases, people who prefer to remain silent often become victims of prejudice. Society tends to label them as arrogant, aloof, weak, awkward, and antisocial. However, as Friedrich Nietzsche would have noted, such a perception stems from the herd's inability to understand true strength, recognizing only the power of attention and publicity. A silent person poses a threat to the collective consciousness because they defy classification and control. They don't seek universal adoration and don't follow accepted behavioral scripts. That's why the herd attacks them with criticism, trying to explain and subdue what it cannot understand. However, Nietzsche admired people who could walk their own path in solitude, not because of an inability to fit into society, but because of a principled refusal to conform to others' standards for the sake of recognition. The philosopher believed that true strength lies in the ability to withstand isolation and not need external validation of one's own worth. A person whose personality doesn't depend on the applause of others becomes invulnerable. In a society obsessed with being noticed, the greatest fear is of someone who doesn't care whether they are being watched or not. In Nietzsche's worldview, strength doesn't manifest as it's commonly praised in society. It's not expressed in loud pronouncements, boasting, or impulsive reactions. It's not the person who constantly defends their opinion, craves applause, or tries to dominate in every situation. True strength, according to the philosopher, is quiet and contemplative. It observes, waits, and when the time comes, strikes with astonishing precision. At the heart of Friedrich Nietzsche's philosophical inquiries stands the concept of the Übermensch, overman, around which, unfortunately, many misconceptions have formed. Contrary to popular belief, it's not an image of an arrogant alpha male striving for domination, nor a ruthless despot trampling on all moral norms. The Übermensch, according to Nietzsche, is someone who has managed to go beyond the narrow confines of moral precepts dictated by the herd. They dwell in a realm where the concepts of good and evil lose their relevance, not because they lack moral principles, but because they possess the ability to create their own unique values. However, on the path to this summit, they must pass through the crucible of solitude. The danger posed by the Übermensch lies not in their pursuit of power as such, but in the fact that they don't need it to achieve a sense of self-sufficiency and fullness of being. They won't raise their voice in desperate attempts to be heard, won't beg for understanding. They simply exist, confident in themselves, focused on their inner world, and filled with purpose. Their silence isn't a sign of weakness, but evidence of the depth of their nature. In a world where everything is subject to immediate reactions, silence becomes a powerful signal, indicating the presence of profound inner content. Nietzsche once uttered a phrase that became iconic: "He who has a why to live can bear almost anyhow." It's this why, this inner purpose, that is the foundation upon which the archetype of the silent but strong person rests. They aren't influenced by fashionable trends, don't move under the influence of resentment or herd instinct. Their roots go into something much deeper, a personal mission, philosophical convictions, their own moral code. That's why they become a figure unpredictable, incomprehensible, and unshakable. Fear of the unknown and uncontrolled is what drives human rejection. Someone who refuses to obey accepted norms, who doesn't flaunt their emotions, risks being labeled a cold, dangerous, and even inhuman outcast. However, as Nietzsche argued, that's the point. A silent person doesn't need constant reaction because they are self-sufficient. They don't stoop to gossip and intrigue, don't waste energy on pointless conflicts. They don't succumb to provocations because they know that true strength lies not in impulsiveness, but in sovereignty. Their laconic presence in society causes discomfort to those who are used to living in a world of noise and bustle, because silence exposes the truth that they are so afraid of. In contrast, a person who needs constant confirmation of their significance, striving to shout louder than everyone else and win any argument to feel smart, is actually weak. They hide behind the noise, trying to drown out the inner emptiness. According to Nietzsche, a silent person has already experienced this emptiness and emerged from it not broken, but hardened. They are not alone because they are rejected, but because they have consciously chosen solitude, preferring it to compromising their own conscience. This is what makes them so intimidating to those around them. In an era dominated by external displays, they prioritize internal fulfillment. In a society obsessed with fleeting attention, they cultivate deep understanding. In a world craving immediate reactions, they choose wise silence. This is the type of personality that Friedrich Nietzsche admired. Not a conqueror striving for power, not a person manipulating the masses, but one who confidently and calmly paves their own path because they have already achieved self-mastery. This person is the embodiment of a silent archetype, a kind of precursor to the Übermensch. That's why, according to Nietzsche, the most dangerous person doesn't raise their voice in a scream. They prefer to observe, to wait for the right moment. And when they finally act, the world holds its breath. Silence is not emptiness or the absence of something. It is an active presence, like a mirror reflecting everything that others try to hide. When such a person enters a room and chooses silence, they disrupt the usual order of things. The fact is that most people are not looking for truth, but for control. Control over the impression they make, over the reactions of others, and over how events unfold. However, silence deprives them of this control. By not answering, not explaining, but simply observing, they force people to confront what they fear most, themselves. That is why Friedrich Nietzsche believed that silence has power. By holding back words, a person not only conserves their strength, but also destroys others' perceptions of their predictability. The unknown breeds fear because people fear what they cannot explain, predict, or control. In the modern world, communication often turns into a spectacle where egocentric personalities strive to impress, dominate, or earn praise. When one of the participants abandons this game, the whole structure collapses. Silence acts like a mirror, reflecting people's need for constant noise to feel alive. Remember the moments when someone's gaze couldn't hold your eye contact, or how you maintained composure in response to provocations, watching the other person's discomfort grow. This is not a manifestation of weakness, but a demonstration of strength through self-control, as Nietzsche argued. It is not what is said that causes fear, but what remains unsaid. Silence implies a lack of need for anyone's approval or attention. In a world where recognition is valued, such indifference makes a person incomprehensibly wealthy. From a psychological perspective, it becomes obvious that silence seems to remove a person's social armor. After all, words often serve as a kind of shield. People often use speech to fill awkward silences, avoid discomfort, or shield themselves from undue attention. However, when an individual consciously chooses silence, they seem to force others to face the reality of the moment without embellishment. It is in such moments that the true essence of each person is revealed. It becomes clear who is insecure, who is just pretending, who desperately needs attention, and who prefers to remain in the shadows, observing what is happening. Modern psychological science confirms that people who are uncomfortable in silence are often not at peace with themselves. They fear empty space not because of its lack of content, but because it makes their inner world echo, exposing their innermost fears and doubts. Silence is not a passive state, but rather an aggressive one in its clarity. As an example, consider the work of experienced investigators who, in their practice, resort to silence more often than to pressure. As soon as the investigator falls silent, the suspect begins to lose composure and fall apart. This is because silence becomes an unbearable burden, a vacuum that requires immediate filling. Another example is influential leaders, such as Vladimir Putin. He doesn't need to raise his voice or prove anything. He often just waits, maintaining an impassive demeanor, allowing others to feel the weight of his gaze and realize his power. His silence seems to say, "I don't need to demonstrate my power, you will feel it anyway." Even in fiction, you can find striking examples of the power of silence. Remember Don Draper from the series Mad Men? He rarely showed emotion and rarely reacted to what was happening. But when he spoke, everyone listened carefully to his every word. And not because he spoke loudly, but because his silence gave his words special weight and significance. Let's consider the type of person whose existence is inextricably linked to virtual battles on Twitter, whose sense of self depends directly on the approval of the crowd. They find no peace until their every opinion is replicated and heard. This individual is loud, but their loudness is merely a mask, concealing inner weakness. Their incessant verbal flow is evidence of a lack of clear position and deep convictions. The silent archetype, stemming from Nietzsche's ideas, stands aside from this commotion. They feel no need to justify or explain their actions, as they have already achieved self-understanding. Their silence is not dictated by coldness or detachment. It is a manifestation of self-control and inner confidence. And nothing frightens insecure people more than someone who does not succumb to provocation and shows no signs of weakness. Silence exposes their own shortcomings and vulnerabilities, depriving them of the ability to hide behind a pretentious facade. At that moment, they appear as they truly are. That is why they are afraid. Not because of what they might be told, but because of the inability to foresee further actions. Unpredictability is true power. So, the next time someone insists on a reaction, pause, take a deep breath, and let silence speak for itself. Observe how your opponents tremble under the weight of that silence. In a world dominated by loud voices, where the number of followers and the speed of expressing opinions are valued, Nietzsche offers a radically different approach, the will to power. However, this concept is often misinterpreted. The will to power is not about suppressing others, not about trying to shout everyone down, and not about controlling people through brute force. At its core, it means self-mastery, self-overcoming, curbing one's impulses and desires, directing energy inward until it accumulates, thickens, and becomes unshakable. It is in this context that silence becomes truly dangerous. Silence is by no means evidence of a lack of power. Rather, it is its restraint. Immobility is not a manifestation of weakness, but, on the contrary, a symbol of deep concentration. Friedrich Nietzsche urged people to avoid seeking universal attention, emphasizing the importance of self-improvement. The philosopher saw the ideal in a person who does not need to raise their voice to be heard, whose presence speaks volumes. It is no coincidence that Nietzsche avoided writing lengthy manifestos and giving endless lectures, preferring aphorisms, concise and expressive sayings. A single line of his text could contain an entire philosophical concept. The reason is that truth does not need verbosity. It needs depth and meaningfulness. As an example, consider his famous statement, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." This phrase is not just a wise observation. It is a sharp weapon, minimalistic, precise, and piercing, like the silence the philosopher admired. This is the principle of true power, not in chaotic activity and noise, but in focus and self-control. Silence is not a passive state, but a strategic tool. It can be used to destabilize an opponent, establish dominance without a single movement, and test the stability of the human mind in the absence of approval. Immobility is both a method of interrogation, a negotiation tactic, and a spiritual practice. In the process of speaking, a person reveals themselves, while silence allows for observation. And observation, as is known, is the first step towards establishing control over the situation. In the modern world, where fleeting thoughts are broadcast on Twitter and opinion leaders trade in ostentatious sincerity but never fall silent, the figure of the silent person, immersed in self-reflection and acting only when necessary, acquires an almost mythical status. Why is this happening? It is precisely silence that creates an aura of mystery, and mystery, in turn, becomes a source of power. This is the manifestation of the will to power, expressed through conscious inaction. It is a kind of act of resistance, an assertion of independence. I am not obliged to share my energy with you. I do not need universal understanding. I'm not afraid of being misunderstood. Such behavior is rejected by the herd, which survives on constant feedback, confirmation of its rightness, and the exchange of understandable signals. However, the Nietzschean individual, striving for the ideal of the Übermensch, prefers to say less and mean more. This is the paradox. The more restrained a person is in words, the stronger their influence on others. The quieter they become, the more others tend to project their own thoughts and expectations onto them. And it is this projection that is a powerful tool. A person ceases to be merely an individual, transforming into a symbol, an enigma that defies resolution. And within this enigma lies their power. Therefore, each person must ask themselves, do they strive for clamorous fame or genuine influence? Do they crave universal attention or real power? The will to power lies not in the demonstration of strength, but in the attainment of inner stability and unwavering devotion to one's mission. Neither silence, nor solitude, nor misunderstanding can shake such a person, for they have reached the highest degree of self-mastery. They are capable of moving through the world quietly and unobtrusively, yet still bending it to their will. In society, it is commonly believed that shyness, social awkwardness, and insecurity are labels affixed to quiet individuals, as if they are somehow deficient, lacking willpower and focus. However, the philosopher Nietzsche would have regarded such judgments with irony. For him, silence was not a deficiency, but a sign of refinement, a manifestation not of passivity, but of selectivity. In a world where noise has become ubiquitous, a person who prefers silence is not simply incapable of speaking. They refuse to squander words needlessly. Modern society conditions people to explain their every move, to comment on every issue, to share their every thought, to demonstrate complete transparency, as if concealing anything makes one suspect. But Nietzsche's worldview is fundamentally different. He believed that the more substantial a person is, the less they need words, the less they should reveal to the world about their inner life. True self-possession does not require ostentation. Society often misunderstands quiet people because it fears what it cannot read in their minds. Nietzsche deeply understood this and asserted, invisible threads are the strongest ties. The silent person holds these threads in their hands. While others expend energy seeking attention, they observe, wait, analyze. They do not speak to fill a void, but speak only when it is truly important, and this is what makes them dangerous. Society mistakenly believes that silence indicates insecurity, but often the opposite is true. A person is silent not because they are unsure of themselves, but because they are unimpressed by the words and actions of others, and they are uninterested in participating in others' games. It is worth considering. In meetings, the person who speaks the most is not always the smartest. In arguments, the one who shouts the loudest is often the least confident in their own correctness. In social networks, the people who react most vehemently to events are the easiest to manipulate. Quiet people, who are able to pause, listen, and reflect, possess a unique psychological strength. And Nietzsche would emphasize that this is not weakness, but a manifestation of a different kind of power. In the modern world where the ostentatious and public dominate, true power, which does not seek demonstration, often remains misunderstood. Society craves loud pronouncements, trendy hashtags, and bombastic speeches, seeking to display even the most intimate corners of the soul. However, silence, as a bastion of restraint, does not succumb to this trend, reliably protecting a person's inner world. This is the root of the misunderstanding. Quiet people are not lagging behind, but confidently moving ahead, so far ahead of others that they have no need for self-promotion. They have seen through the veil of superficial perceptions and made a conscious choice in favor of depth rather than fleeting attention. In an age of universal noise, such a decision takes on a truly revolutionary character. How then does one touch this awe-inspiring Nietzschean silence? It all begins with restraint. Most people feel an overwhelming need to respond immediately, to justify themselves, to defend their position. But true power is manifested in the ability to pause, allowing silence to speak for itself. Let those around you suffer in ignorance, trying to fill the resulting void with their own conjectures, and observe as they reveal their true intentions. Silence serves two important functions. It exposes others and elevates you. Imagine a conflict situation. Instead of succumbing to emotions and reacting vehemently, maintain composure, keep your posture, and simply wait. Suddenly, the initiative passes to your opponent, who begins to lose confidence, because silence unnerves those who are unsure of themselves. It deprives them of the usual sustenance in the form of a response, turning their performance into a meaningless monologue, and the disputants themselves into a laughingstock. Friedrich Nietzsche not only wrote about silence, but also lived in accordance with this principle. His aphorisms were characterized by brevity, surgical precision, and caused anxiety. He did not seek to lull the reader, but wanted to pierce their consciousness with a minimum of words. This is the key point. It is not necessary to explain everything to the end. Mystery is a source of power. The more you reveal about yourself, the more predictable you become. Nietzsche believed that a strong person is never fully read. This isn't about manipulating others, but about self-mastery. You're not obligated to disclose your inner life to everyone. Let others guess and form their own assumptions. Your silence becomes a mirror, reflecting their true essence. Their reactions will tell you everything without unnecessary words. How do you achieve this inner calm? Not in the hustle and bustle, but in solitude and silence. It's necessary to find time for yourself to reflect and put your thoughts on paper. Not for likes and approval on social media, but to gain clarity of mind. It's important to ask yourself, in what situations does excessive emotionality manifest? Where does the obsessive need to justify yourself, prove your point, or play an unnatural role arise? Then, let go of these unnecessary impulses. After all, as Nietzsche wisely observed, you must become yourself, not what others have tried to make you. Not who the crowd approves of, but the authentic person hidden beneath the mask. And this true version of yourself doesn't need to shout it from the rooftops. It's enough to simply enter the room and remain silent, because the very essence of the person speaks for itself. I know who I am. Ultimately, the silent figure Nietzsche spoke of is not timid or shy. They are not passive or inactive. On the contrary, they are precise, detached, and sharp, like a blade that doesn't need to be brandished. In a world where noise and clamor, constant posts, excessive information exchange, and constant justifications are valued above all else, silence becomes a true rebellion. It declares, I don't need your approval. I'm not afraid of your misunderstanding. I've already achieved self-mastery, and you're just trying to catch up, and that is awe-inspiring. It is quite likely that individuals will be inclined to mock those who stand out from the crowd. They may label a person as aloof, arrogant, or difficult to communicate with. However, the reason for this behavior lies not in the actual qualities of the person, but in their inability to understand and decipher the inner world of that person. And what remains incomprehensible causes fear and a desire for control. Instead of giving in to provocations, you should make others uncomfortable with your calm and observant demeanor. Don't engage in pointless arguments and avoid aggressive outbursts. The absence of reaction to external stimuli can be a powerful tool of influence. Silence is not emptiness, but concentrated presence. It's a manifestation of the power of the mind, which has no need to proclaim itself with a shout. It patiently waits for the right moment, and when the time comes to act, its decisions are characterized by decisiveness, inevitability, and finality. If you've ever felt like an outsider in this noisy world, don't despair. Perhaps your destiny is not to be part of the universal cacophony. Your nature is to be unwavering. Remain calm and let others feel your inner strength.